Welcome, CEOs. I am Hermione Olivia, and I invite you to cherish every opportunity to connect the dots. CEO Yourself was inspired to be a destination for motivation and to inspire you wherever you are on your journey to become the CEO of your life. Coming up on this week's episode of CEO Yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I will also say I think everyone goes to stress school in their different ways. You know, like we're all the product of our own experiences, and what stresses someone out might not stress someone else out because of our different thresholds. But my sort of stress school was, I mean, I really believe it's what led me to totally doing this, but it was needed because I had a very calm upbringing. And so I kind of had that polarity of really understanding like how calm you could feel and how extremely stressed and anxious you could feel. And so I was like, woo, well, this is really not, it hasn't got longevity to be able to keep up with this. And I was like, okay, well, the one thing that I can change is my own response. We don't understand our system well enough to actually be able to manage it in this increased, heightened scenario that we've created for ourselves. So we don't understand when it's getting stressed, why, and also how to manage our emotions, how to manage our mind, how to connect to ourselves.
Alice Law is a renowned stress management consultant and wellness expert, Sunday Times best-selling author, international speaker, and podcast host. She has recently launched the book Unstressable with her co-author, Mo Gaudat. Alice, welcome to CEO Yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here.
I'm so excited to deep dive your story, but mostly because I had heard whispers that perhaps, despite co-authoring this incredible book with such a wonderful person, opportunities were only presenting themselves to him at times, not to both of you. So it's an honor today to have just you here in the studio and to be focusing on your side of the story. So thank you for being here.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. It's funny actually because it's been an interesting, like, Mo Gaudat, my co-author, is he's like family to me, and he's such a wonderful mentor, friend, and everything above. And it's been a really interesting sort of thing that we didn't actually see coming in that sense because we don't think that way. And so he was a bit like, oh, why on earth would like people not want Alice on podcasts with me if we wrote 50-50 of the book and are totally yin and yang? You know, what I talk about in the book is completely opposite to him. He's so logical, engineering, incredible. And I'm like, the emotive, spiritual side. And so it's our combination that we love. And so it's really like eye-opening actually in a different way. And I think for me, I think it's sort of a two-part situation, is that we kind of live in this society where we're obsessed with fame and a name. And also partly I think that there's still, despite what, it's actually a piece of work that I want to do in the future, but despite what so many, we've come forwards in so many different ways. There's like female in business and different aspects, but the reality is like Mo's a man who used to run Google X, and that means a lot in two sides. Like he used to run Google X, and he's a very well thought of businessman. And also I think because he's a man in that space, it was like a lot of people were like, oh no, we'll just have Mo, because why do you need Alice if you've got Mo? Do you know what I mean? And so I think it was really eye-opening, and it's still a kind of challenge, but it's something that I definitely want to like keep bringing to light, keep moving forwards with, because the whole side is completely, we are completely different, and that's why we wrote it together, so we could bring the best of both sides. And when we speak together, it's always that way. It's like with our members or with our, we're doing a book talk, everyone's like, God, you guys work so well together. I get half what you say, half what you say, and it lands no matter who's in the audience. And so it's that combination we've really enjoyed together.
Well, I hope he's not offended that he's not here today, but we only interview women at CEO Yourself. And initially, I did have him on my list when I wasn't just going to go exclusively women. So I love you, Mo. Thank you for all that you do. But today's about you, and I'm so excited to hear your story and to share it with our audience. So I understand that you call it stress school, which is such a beautiful way of looking at what was obviously such a difficult time in your life, because you struggled with severe prolonged stress for 10 years.
Yeah.
Can you talk to the audience and give them a little insight into your experience with stress and how it's brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I will also say I think everyone goes to stress school in their different ways. Like we're all the product of our own experiences, and what stresses someone out might not stress someone else out because of our different thresholds. But my sort of stress school was, I mean, I really believe it's what led me to totally doing this, but it was needed because I had a very calm upbringing. And so I kind of had that polarity of really understanding like how calm you could feel and how extremely stressed and anxious you could feel. And so I was like, woo, well, this is really not, it hasn't got longevity to be able to like keep up with it. But yeah, my stress school was, it was basically, I experienced loss in every aspect of my life continually after the other. So it started with my wonderful dad was a very successful entrepreneur earlier in my life, and he really suffered after the 2008 credit crisis hit, and financially, and that was really a big strain on our family. He was forced to sell our home and personal assets, and he was of that generation where it's like, men provide, that's my identity. And so that really, really shook him, not being able to be in that capacity in the way that he was before. And it was during that time that my eldest wonderful half-sister Suzanne got diagnosed with cancer out of the blue. And she had a 4-year struggle with it and won a couple of times, but then we devastatingly lost her 4 years later. And over that period of time, there was a legal situation with my dad from people he'd once, thought of as chosen family, falsely accusing him of something in business that he only managed to prove, way, way further down the line. So it was like years of stress of legal battles, which I'm sure people can understand, those looming things that hang over you. And after my sister died, it was 4 days after she died that my dad was rushed to hospital for basically a blood clot because he'd been so, just still depressed, lying on his bed in grief. And they scanned his body, resolved the clot, but when they scanned his body, they realized he then had, tumors again in his body because he actually had cancer when I was 3, but recovered really well. And so at this point, he was just so depressed. He was like, I've just given up. He was like, I've lost my daughter. I've lost my, financial stability, my, everything. My company, he'd had to put his company into administration that he'd spent years building, and he'd lost, his mental health, his health, friends. He was just like, no, this is just not worth it. And anyway, I was at this point, I was so stressed. I was just waking up every day, anxiously look at my phone in case I had more bad news from my family. My boyfriend at the time had moved to Singapore, and he actually cheated on me after my sister died. So then we broke up, and then it was during this time that my dad was still, in depression post my sister, that I then got made redundant from my job because they were moving the office abroad. And they were like, would you want to come to Monaco? And I was like, no. So it was just this whole kind of continuous thing. And I was so stressed and so miserable.
Even hearing you tell it, I can feel the physical trauma of the stress.
Yeah.
Like I can hear it in your voice, obviously, but it's amazing how it actually takes you. I'm sure those listening can also feel it, but it just makes you feel heavy and sad. Of course, we're empathetic, but it's like, it's amazing how stress, even hearing the story of what you went through, what it can create in the human body.
Yeah, it can totally take you over. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I need to sort this out because I realized everything that was happening to me, it was totally out of my control. I couldn't make my dad happier. I couldn't bring my sister back. I couldn't, magically wish our financial situation as a graduate back to what it was, and get my boyfriend back. I didn't at the time want that, but all these different things. And I was like, okay, well, the one thing that I can change is my own response. And so I started to sort of self-study at this time, just before I got made redundant. Actually, in those years when my sister was in hospital, I started to really look at, okay, how do you work out how to deal with stress? And I looked at it from the mind and from energy and from the emotions and the body. I wanted to understand it really in a different holistic way. And I found what really worked for me. And I was like, oh, okay. It started to become more like myself, my, calmer, happier version of myself. And then it was 4 years after my sister died that my dad was rushed to hospital. And he actually died 3 weeks later, not of cancer, but of a burst stomach ulcer that burst and caused internal complications. And that was all from accumulated stress. And I really, from that point, after redundancy, I started to do this and train in the different modalities I knew and started to work with clients and companies. But it was after my dad died that I really was like, okay, this affects a person so much, but also affects a family. It affects, everything around you, your community. And so that's when I met Mo afterwards, and we decided to write the book and do some things together. But yeah, stress for me it's not the enemy, but it is something that really, really needs to be considered in a much different way.
What an extraordinary journey. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Let's talk about what they're coining the term as the stress generation. Why do you think people are so stressed today? Do you think it's that they're just feeling more able to talk about it, or do you think life is actually more stressful?
I think both. I think that it's incredible that we've now created this space, whether it's online or in our own communities, that we feel like we can share. Well, a majority don't still, because we know that suicide is the biggest killer for men under 50 in the UK, and that's largely because they're not sharing. But there's definitely been a huge shift, right? In like you say, just being able to say like, oh, you know what, I'm actually having a down day. I feel anxious today. And people do not be like, what on earth is wrong with you? So there's definitely that. But I think the other side of it is that we are basically in information and system overload, and we're at a time where we have never been so overly stimulated in our nervous system in our lives. And with that, whether it's from our devices, whether it's from the news, whether it's from this constant busy society that we live in, you know, being busy has become like a status symbol to now, and it's kind of like our way of saying like, I'm wanted, I'm needed. You know, you ask a friend, how are you? They'll always be like, oh yeah, I'm great, I'm so busy, like I've been so busy. It's a constant like normal answer. And we've kind of on this rat race of continue just sort of adding instead of taking away. But I think that, you know, that partly is the case, but the other part is also that we don't understand our system well enough to actually be able to manage it in this increased, heightened scenario that we've created for ourselves. So we don't understand when it's getting stressed, why, and also how to manage our emotions, how to manage our mind, how to connect to ourselves. Because no one was really, I mean, I can't speak for everyone listening to this podcast, but, you know, I know that I definitely wasn't brought up being like, you know, this is what an emotion is. This is how you move it through you. You know, most people are brought up saying like, if you're crying, you know, stop crying. You know, what kind of response really is that? It's quite funny, you know, so it's definitely, I think that part, like we've created this really intense society to live in that's overly stimulating us. And then we don't know how to calm our system down in this stimulation.
So what would you say are the types of stress that we're dealing with each day? And then let's move on to, I hope you can share how to deal with them.
Yeah, totally. So I will say just quickly, like not all stress is bad. You know, we have you.Stress, which is the good stress, and then distress is kind of the opposite. And you.Stress is the kind of stress that is what was meant for our system to happen. It's like it goes on and it comes off and it helps you to perform better. So when your fight and flight stress response goes off, you know, your system gets flooded with noradrenaline, adrenaline, cortisol, the infamous stress hormone, which short term is great. And it literally prepares your body to either run from a tiger or fight. And actually, you know, it's incredible in that sense. It configures you to basically be superhuman. And then once the threat is over, you go back into parasympathetic rest and digest state. And that, in terms of going on and coming off, you.Stress is great because it will help you win a race. It will help you do a great talk in front of on stage. It will help you get a deadline over the line at the right time. If you've got a deadline in a week, you know, people can deal with that kind of stress for that amount of time. But today we don't have that. We have it continually simmering in the background. And so the types of stress, you know, that we talk about, for example, in the book, is the 4 types of stress within ourselves. It's something we really wanted to actually get people to understand. Stress is a very blanket term. And looking at mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual stress, because we have 4 parts of the self, you know, mind, heart, body, soul, and they all get stressed in totally different ways. And while obviously the standard way of like our biology getting stressed in that system, it's also looking at actually diving into, and I can go through the 4 types with you, is actually when you realize which part of you is getting stressed, then you can manage it more easily because you can calm it down in the specific way that's needed. And we're all interlinked, right? But, you know, your mental stress shows up as rumination, constantly anxious, you know, worrying thoughts, always in your head. Like you're never fully present. You'll find it hard to focus. You're probably struggling to sleep because your mind is racing before you go to bed, or you're waking up in the middle of the night. And yeah, it's just constantly being in your head in that stressed way. And then a lot of fear-based thoughts as well. You know, we go right into fear under stress. It's so because we're looking for the threat. You know, your brain's primary function is to keep you safe. And then the emotional side looks at 2 parts. So you'll either be feeling a certain way, which I'll talk about, or you'll be behaving a certain way. So a lot of people are like, I'm not emotionally stressed, but their behavior will give them away. So emotional stress comes as the feelings, you know, stress, anxiety, fear, overwhelm, anger, irritability, even depression, because we know that long-term chronic stress can turn into depression. And obviously, you know, your negative, uncomfortable feelings make you feel stressed in different ways. But the behavior of it, if people are like, oh, I'm not stressed, it's that behavioral change of numbing and doing things like outward distraction, like binge watching Netflix, overeating or forgetting to eat, you know, reaching for a glass of alcohol in the evening as that immediate release rather than actually going and dealing with the feeling itself.
We've all been.
Yeah, exactly. Even, over socializing, overworking. So that outward numbing of the emotions because you don't want to feel. And then things like, irritability, again, it's like snapping at loved ones, oversleeping, feeling tired and fatigued because your emotions unprocessed will actually weigh you down energetically and emotionally. And so, looking at those different aspects and stress, stress will turn up as, memory loss and so many different things we can talk about. And physical stress, which is physical stress is so obvious, but so often we tell ourselves that's got nothing to do with stress. Like that headache I've had for 6 months is not because I'm stressed. I just randomly get headaches, or those digestive issues that I've had for ages. I can't be stressed. So yeah, your body really is, I always say, like, your body's far wiser than your mind. So when it's telling you something, it's really time to pay attention, because our body is actually incredibly resilient. If it's starting to show you signals of stress, your body has been under stress for quite a while. It's not going to just get a headache from one day of stress. It's a continual chronic buildup. So yeah, physical stress shows up in so many different ways of like average things like, things like shoulder aches, neck aches, muscle aches, digestive issues, stomach ulcers, IBS, headaches, and then, trouble sleeping, thinking, then getting into more severe things like increased blood pressure, heart palpitations. You then look at also the sad truth of actually, we know stress can lead to type 2 diabetes, and, studies are now showing that it can lead to cancer because it can turn on certain genes being able to express in a different way that can turn, cause cancer. And also, heart disease, as we know, is a huge, huge factor of stress. And so, yeah, stress can kill in that sense. We know this, but we always tell ourselves like, oh, I'll go and deal with that in like a week's time. It's fine. And the final one is like one of my favorites, which is spiritual stress. And I define spiritual stress as sort of two sides. So one is we become spiritually stressed when we're totally out of alignment with the truest version of ourself, our most authentic self, our soul self. And so we can't answer the question, for example, we don't know who we are beyond the labels of life. Like, I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm a doctor, whatever it is, when that's not who we are, it's what we are. And so when we're kind of out of alignment with that and we're just doing what society was kind of throwing us into, whether it's family, friends, whatever it is, we become really stressed because something doesn't feel right, and it's not, and we're disconnected from our intuition. Or the other side of it is that we actually have gotten to know ourselves on that deeper level and we've connected to our intuition, but then we just completely disregard everything our intuition says. So it's like all the times you've sort of spoken yes and felt no and just gone and done the opposite. And then we will, again, create more stress for ourselves because life, the universe has to try and get our attention in a more aggressive way, whether it's like redundancy from that job or, that breakup, whatever it is. It's kind of what I call in the book the soul slap. It's like that side swipe.
It's so interesting that you bring that up because that's what CEO Yourself is all about. It's designed to support you to become the truest version of yourself, because so many of the women I mentor, and certainly my experience has been that you might pursue and chase a goal or a dream or a vision, but it's actually not in alignment with your true calling or mission or purpose. And so you get that title and you get that salary and you get that office or that house or whatever it is, and you realize, oh my God, I feel so misaligned with where I'm meant to be and so unhappy. This is so wonderful to hear because there's so many insights here, and I'm sure so many people at home were also nodding along with me thinking, oh, I've had that and that and that. So many of the examples you gave I've had, probably most of them in my time. What I'm very interested in is how can we switch stress into a positive mode? So for example, this morning I hosted my first webinar. I was obviously nervous, and telling myself this nervous feeling is actually really akin to excitement really helped me to breathe and feel more comfortable and not let that anxiety take over. So usually where my palms would have started to be sweaty, I would have gotten a sore tummy, all those kind of physical ways that it plays out were held off because I was like, no, this is excitement. This is a really exciting moment. But are there ways that we can practically transform all of these types of stress into a more positive experience?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the stress you just talked about, you're actually talking about you stress again. So that good stress, it's like, okay, you're about to do something you maybe haven't done before. And it's like, okay, this is stressful, but it's also exciting. How do you kind of manage being able to deal with the anxiety of it? And so for that, it's actually like, developing your stress threshold, which is essentially the amount that you'll be able to do it. Every time will get a little bit easier. It's like if you're an athlete and you're going to run a race continually every single day, every time that you actually go into competition, you're going to get better with your nerves because you'll get more used to it. And so we can manage our thresholds in terms of performance with just actually, it's that age-old phrase of like, feel the fear and do it anyway, and change that narrative in your mind at the time to be like, okay, what is actually fictional and what's fact? The fiction in your mind is probably, I'm not saying you, but in that situation, it's like, okay, well, everything's going to go wrong. And, what if my microphone breaks? What if everyone thinks I'm shit? Sorry. What if I say something so stupid? None of that's fact. That's all a made up projection in your head about what's going to happen in the future. And so looking at actually breaking that narrative of being like, okay, mentally stressed there, like, what is fiction? What is fact? The fact is, you've got people turning up to the webinar, you're good at what you do, nothing's gone wrong yet, so why are you telling yourself that it might? Deal with that as and if it arises, and actually calming your nervous system down in the process. Like you talked about there before, like, oh, maybe my stomach would get sore, I'd have like, sweaty palms, whatever it is. Those things are also very natural, and that's your body just saying like, okay, we're excited, we're under stress, but then it's also making sure that you don't allow that to debilitate you. So, for example, like, that debilitating anxiety of actually being too fearful and having a panic attack, or, breathing too deeply into, not deeply, but too fast and shallowly, that's going to debilitate you in that situation. And so it's about like about nervous system regulation. When we're going into stressful states, your brain, giving yourself that pattern interruption with your mind and telling it, okay, we're safe, bring me a useful thought. What are we going to do today in this situation that's going to benefit people, and how can I bring something great to it? And then actually calming your body down, just taking some really deep exhales before you start, because when we extend our exhale, that puts you into parasympathetic state, and just learning those hacks to be able to get through those stressful moments. But in terms of actually like I don't believe chronic stress is good for anyone.
Okay.
So long-term stress, that's the stress that debilitates us and wears us down, and that's when we actually become, physically ill as well. And so that regulation really has to come back to actually being aware when stress is turning up in your system a lot more, what kind of stressed you are mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and then using the tools that you can get to actually deal with that. And every single day putting in 5-minute practices. I think this massive myth with stress, or even, work on ourselves. It's like, oh, I don't have 2 hours a day to do this. No one has 2 hours a day to do this. I don't have 2 hours a day to meditate. But everyone has 5 minutes to meditate. And, if you can actually just sort of implement 5-minute strategies into your day, as well as those half an hours once a week, then you'll see a huge change. And I think that's what people need to kind of understand. It's like, you don't expect to put no effort into your business or your relationship and have a great time with them. But the same thing is with our system and our relationship with ourselves. We just expect us to be amazing all the time. And it's like, if you're not going to understand your system, work on yourself in that way, don't expect to feel good a majority of the time.
I agree completely. It's about finding those little windows and then doing it over and over and over again. So across all those types of stress, what would you say are just like the quick fire 3 hacks to overcome stress in the moment? Not prolonged, just that short-term stress feeling.
In the moment, I mean, if you're feeling anxious, one of my favorite ones is actually just doing a full body shakeout, like a zebra, they say. So it's like, do you want
to do that for us now, for those watching on YouTube? I'm serious.
I won't do it right now because I'm sweating. So my Skims is not going to help the situation with my arms up in the air. But like, if you do basically shake your body from like head to toe, with your arms up in the air, just limbs like an animal essentially. That will help move anxiety out of you, and it'll tell your system that you're safe again. So like parasympathetic. So it's like that book by Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's that natural thing of, when a zebra is running away from a lion, if it manages to escape, then as soon as the threat is over and it's actually escaped the lion, it will do a full body shakedown, just like a dog will if it's had, like a fight with another dog, you'll see it going away and just shake its body. So we can tell our system, in those sort of more primitive ways, like, you're safe, it's okay.
Extraordinary.
Because the modern world is constantly telling us that were unsafe. Our brain sadly hasn't caught up to the fact that a stressful email from, you know, your boss, whoever it is still going to set your stress response off in the same way that that tiger coming out of the bushes off. It's the same reaction. So we have to, regulate it in a different way.
So that's number one, shake it off.
Shake it off.
Number two?
Another one, again, is breathing. You know, it's so simple, but just extending your exhales. And I like to put like a labeled alarm in, you know, old clients' phones. It's like put a labeled alarm in 5 times a day, just saying breathe. Or just saying 4-4-8, which is like breathe in through your nose for 4, hold your breath for 4, and breathe out of your mouth for 8, because again, it's extending that exhale. And just doing that 3 times, 5 times a day, and that's 1 minute. You know, it's literally tiny little intervals to tell your body again you're safe and just to regulate a little bit more. And then third quick one, I would say, is actually just, it's a little bit longer, but it's tapping in with yourself at the end of every day. So actually being in tune with how you're feeling. So a lot of the time we are so on the go, we're so busy, we just run away from our emotions, like I talked about earlier. And if you can actually just, with the pen and paper, if you find it harder to, sit with yourself and actually notice how you feel, but bridge it from your mind to your heart then. So get a pen and paper out in a journal and just ask yourself, how do I feel today? And how do I want to feel today? And just notice if they're really far apart or if they're aligned. And if they're far apart, then, do one small little micro-intentional action to help move you towards the feeling you want. So if you're feeling anxious and you want to feel calm, think of one thing, like whether it's calling someone really soothes you as a friend and is actually really reassuring, or whether it's doing a quick meditation, going for a quick walk, doing some exercise. Just think of one thing you can do to help move the needle towards how you feel instead.
Thank you.
How you want to.
Such sage advice. You said something beautiful, which was, the universe always knows what's best for you, because it's not the events in your life that stress you, it's the way you deal with them, which I think is such an incredible way to acknowledge what we're here to talk about today, but also to reflect on the experiences we have in our life are often serving us, even if they are profoundly stressful. All of those experiences you had have brought you here today, and now you're in a position where you've co-authored this incredible book and you have a new platform. Can you tell us about them?
Yes, so thank you. So no, I mean, it's definitely, I do believe everything brings us to the moment you're meant to be in at that moment. And so the book, Unstressable, that Mo and I wrote together, is really, it's about, being unstressable isn't about never being stressed. It's about being able to deal with the stress that arises in our lives inevitably. And we work off something called the 3 L's, which is limit, learn, and listen. And so it's about understanding where your stress is actually coming from in your life, from a model we have called a ton of stress. Those macro external, micro internal, and vice versa. So really understanding where your stress is coming from, limiting the stress that you can actually limit and get out of your life, the needless stress, as we call it, and then learning to manage the 4 parts of yourself, those mental, emotional, physical, spiritual sides, and actually listening to them. The book, in that sense, it's all about really understanding stress from a more holistic sense. And the platform is off the book, basically. We really wanted to, we've had this book ready for, I can't even think, like 3 years or something. Yeah. But it was delayed because the publishing world, the way that kind of is. And we were like, well, everyone's so stressed and anxious. We wanted to do something with it. So everything that we can't put in the book, because you're only allowed to obviously put so many words in a book anyway, we created a platform that's basically, it adds to it. So it's video trainings with us and webinars with us and meditations and a community space. And it's just that like extra part for people to be able to either dive into it having read the book, or just be able to have a space every month that they can actually just have that support and community, because community is such a big factor in managing stress. When we isolate ourselves, we become so much more stressed.
Amazing. And now you've chosen the CEO Superpower Intuition, which I'm so thrilled to deep dive, because I think it's pivotal to becoming the best version of yourself. Why did you choose the word intuition?
So intuition for me is a superpower for everyone that we all have, but we don't tend to connect to. So we've been in this world, obviously, where logic has really been the prize thing for years. It's like you go out, masculine, be, achieve, da-da-da. But intuition is, it's our ancient wisdom, and it's something that we all possess. But the more we're in our mind and the less we're in our body and our heart, the harder we find to connect to our intuition. And so I chose it as that superpower because I think it's something that not only people need to be able to use in business in terms of being intuitively making decisions that they know might be a risk or what's right for them, or actually being able to cut stuff out that they're holding on to out of fear in their mind, various things, and changing track, but also because I think individually it's our superpower. You know, if you can intuitively understand what's right for you, what's wrong for you, both in your relationships as well as, you know, yourself, as well as your work, then you can really start to see things unfold in a much more flowy and natural fashion than when we kind of try to control what we should be doing through our mind. And so, yeah, I think intuitive connection is really, really important because we allow our brains to tell us, oh, no, don't listen to that because what about this? Because we're so fearful. And it goes back to that thing, you know, like we talked about, all the times you've felt yes and said no, or vice versa. And so it's actually being able to connect to that and know that even if the outside world is telling you that's wrong, if you feel that it's right for you and your intuition is saying do it, then being able to actually have the courage to follow that. And the more you do, the more you strengthen it.
The obvious next question is going to be, how do you connect your intuition for those at home? That is a question that I've had many times in my time because I love speaking about intuition. How would you advise the listener to connect honestly and wholeheartedly with their intuition?
Yeah, so intuition is about moving away from, you know, the racing thoughts of your mind and moving into the space of your heart and your body and your gut. And I will say one thing is, like, intuition is different for everyone in terms of, you know, there's an exercise that a shaman actually talked about in his book, and it's essentially about, you know, I put it and I referenced it in our book because it's about actually asking your body what your yes and no is in a quite a long little exercise. But the point is that once you connect your body and your heart, then you'll start to actually connect your intuition. We can't rationalize and think our way into our intuition. You know, that the point is, it's like that sensory side of you. And so for me, I will do something, for example, where I speak to my soul, because the heart's the gate to intuition, you know, it's the bridge to your soul. But your soul is always trying to guide you in intuitive guidance and whispers and nudges. And so I will sit, for example, in a quiet space and close my eyes, you know, light a candle, even if this is just to strengthen it. You know, in the moment, once you'll get those feelings and be like, well, I know that's right for me, it's instinctive. But to sort of do it for yourself, close your eyes in a quiet space, light a candle, and just notice, first of all, like breathing deeply, take a few deep breaths, and actually notice the feeling in your mind, so that busyness in your head, the energy up there. So we're always in that space of us. So you'll be able to sort of feel that energy in your mind buzzing around, and then moving it down your body. So like bringing the awareness of it and moving it down your body, down your throat, and into your heart space, until your awareness is now actually, okay, I'm aware of that part of my body now. I'm connected to that. And even placing a hand over it, you know, and breathing into that space. And then just asking your soul, so I say this, it's like, soul, what do I need to know about X or Y? And noticing what answer comes up from that part of you rather than, you know, this part up here. Or you can ask yes and no questions, like, you know, soul, is it right that I go and do this? And see what the feeling is. Like, is it like a no? Is it a yes? And once you know your sort of, you know, yes and no in different ways, you can really start to understand where that's coming up in your life. You know, you'll be having a conversation with someone, you're making a decision about something, and you're like, oh, that doesn't feel right. That's your no. Or, oh, yes, that feels great. That's really energizing. That feels like I need to move towards it. And I will say as well, it's like, in terms of connecting to your intuition, the more you practice and the more you act on it, the stronger it gets. The more you ignore it, the weaker it gets. So it's like a muscle in that way. You have to train it, because if you're continually pushing it away, it's harder to bring it in because you've repressed it and ignored it. So you have to really try to open it up and actually feel it. So as much as we like to stay in our heads, the more emotional work, the more you're actually able to go into your emotions themselves and actually be brave enough to sit with the feelings in your body, the easier you'll find it to connect to your intuition, because it's all remains in there.
What I was going to ask is, how do you then develop trust in your intuition? Because I became a mum last year and I suffered from anxiety quite badly after she was born. And over that period of time, I lost kind of faith in my own mind and my own choices, because I was constantly questioning everything. So therefore it was harder to be certain of where I was meant to go and what I was meant to do. And it made me quite indecisive. How can you encourage that kind of faith and trust in that? Is it just through practice?
Well, it's practice, and also like the trust comes from, their internal confidence with ourselves, and our confidence can get knocked when we feel like we've made the wrong decision. But I don't ever believe there is a fully wrong decision, because it's like goes back to what we said before, like you'll always end up to where you're meant to be in that moment for your highest good, whether it's a really hard lesson you needed to learn or whether it was actually something that came really easily to you and was magical. And so I think it's partly about, the practice of actually just following through with it, and not berating yourself when you think from your head and your ego that was the wrong choice because it hadn't worked out as to how your human self would decided already it had to be. Because we always have these things where we think we're not meant to see the full picture yet, right? Like, so you might you might follow your intuition on something, and then your brain will tell you when something went wrong, well, that was the wrong decision, like, how can I trust my intuition? But then a year later, what you can't have seen in the puzzle ahead will come out of it, and you'll be like, well, that was the right decision all along. So it really, for me, goes back to the idea of, like, don't put your head as the forefront of your intuition. Like, don't let yourself doubt it. Even when you follow through on something and you think it hasn't worked, you don't know yet if it actually might have worked in a better way than you're going to be able to see. So, practicing that confidence of being like, okay, I made that decision. Maybe I can't yet see why this was the right thing for me, but I will try to trust that something will come out of it in a different way. And I'll just ask myself, what have I learned in the process of it in the meantime?
You're so right as well that I ignored my inner voice for a long time in many moments in my life, and the way it plays out physically is just extraordinary to watch. That voice inside, if you ignore it, the body starts to go, you're ignoring me. I'm going to force you to listen. So I'm so grateful for your insights, and for everyone listening at home, I am sure they would have taken so much away from your insights around stress and intuition. We always ask our guests what is their legacy piece of advice, which is how they would want to be remembered.
My legacy piece of advice actually goes back to that intuition piece, and actually my legacy piece of advice would be to get to know yourself on a deeper level than your human level. So get to know yourself away from if everything around you crumbled and everything that was material and, that in that sense was taken away. Get to know yourself on that really deeper core resilience, so that your soul self, that core, is always, that's the constant. No matter what goes on in the outside world, that essence of you, who you truly are, is going to always be with you. And so if we can get to know that on that deeper level, we can use it in our times of, crisis, of course, and, stress, and overcome all these challenges. But it'll also, it'll guide you to something far happier and greater in your great times as well.
So you have this beautiful new book and the new platform.
I feel like, I'm definitely doing more speaking, and Mo and I at the platform are putting into companies and stuff, and that's definitely something our mission together is to take 1 million people a year out of stress through the book, through speaking, through the platform. And so I definitely, that's going to be a big focus, but I also, intuitively, I want to do something with a bit of what we talked about at the very beginning, which I call Superwoman Syndrome, which is a whole other conversation, but I hope that'll be my sort of next book I write. And so, that's a sort of little way off, but it's definitely a big what's next for me, if that makes sense.
I can't wait to read it. Now, we will link the book, but where can the listener find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at @AliceLaw._. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, and then my website is byalicelawcom. And I have a podcast, Unstressable with Alice. I'm just around.
We'll link it all. And we'll link Unstressable, the platform, and the page. And I can't wait for our listener to continue to learn and watch your extraordinary story unfold.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been so wonderful.
Thank you for being here.
It would mean the world to me if you would share today's episode with someone you feel would enjoy it. And don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment.